using QGIS 3.3.0, which was just released on Friday or Saturday, depending on which operating system you use. So it's only been out a couple days, and just as a reminder, here I have QGIS open, and if I go to the help menu and go to about, I can see which version I'm installing. And if I go to what's new, there's a version of the change logs available right from QGIS here. So just want to remind everyone that you can go there and see a list of the new features that are in each version as just a list. And so there's a lot that is new just in this one version. There are more than 50 new features since 3.2.8 in 20 different categories. So I'm not going to go through them all, just going to hit some of the highlights. And this is the URL for the visual changelog. It just came out yesterday. There had been a video up online, but there's now an actual visual changelog webpage on QGIS.org. And in yellow here are the categories that I'm going to cover. Some of the categories had fairly minor, very specific new features, and I chose what I thought might be most interesting to more people. So I'm happy to share all this with my fellow QGIS nerds. One major change that's coming in 3.3.0 is that, and this is what they call a breaking change. They are dropping the project level backward compatibility for symbology with QGIS 3.16 and older. So this means that if you open up QGIS, a project that's older than 3.16 in QGIS 3.3.0, the symbology may not be intact. It may change. And this is because previous releases of QGIS would write significant amount of compatibility objects into the project XML structure to maintain that backward compatibility. And I guess the developers feel that they need to minimize that and just keep backwards compatibility for what the last 2 years of QGIS versions or so. So once you install 3.3.0, just beware that if you open up a project older than 3.16, the symbology may not come intact. And so at some point it may be good to open up older projects in something other than 3.16 and save them so that they will be more, intact in future versions of QGIS. There were a lot of expressions added at 3.3.0, and I'm showing these first because I'm going to show some examples with other features that use these. So there is a pair of functions mapped to HTML for table and DL that can be used with what Danny was just talking about with when you have on the display tab, when you write an HTML expression to have an HTML pop-up, those expressions can be used. And there's some of these are specific to raster. There's a raster attributes function that can be used in concert with those, and a layer cursor point that allows you to drag your cursor across the map and get that map tip to pop up for raster data, which I'll show you in a minute. There's a whole series of ID functions of features underscore ID, just takes the @feature variable and will return the feature ID. There's is feature valid, is attribute valid. So if there have been constraints entered against those and they're violated, that would return that. And then these variables for X, Y, Z, and M for returning that geometry at a specific vertex. So very specific expressions. Moving into map tools, there's a couple really nice new features. One relating to the identify features tool, and one relating to raster data. So here I have a map open of just the DHOM OFLL for Trelleborg. And if I use the identify results panel, I can switch it to on mouse over, and you'll see that now as I move my cursor over this elevation data set, I get live updates without clicking on the elevation where my cursor lies, without clicking. So that's quite nice. There's also raster map tips, which are now available. So this is opening up the display tab for a raster and entering in an expression using some of the new functions, map to HTML table, raster attribute function, so that when I activate map tips, I can see a pop-up table of the values of this raster. So this is a categorical raster that has an attribute table associated with it. And so I can now hover over it in QGIS and do a pop-up. I didn't spend enough time on this to make the pop-up or the map tip look good, but this is something that's now possible with rasters. And there are quite a few other raster related features in 3.3.0. So something that came, I think it was at 3.2.8, was the ability for QGIS to read raster attribute tables. And there had been a plugin developed, and then that was put into QGIS Core. So there's now several new features related to raster attribute tables that you can access in QGIS 3.3.0. I'll go through these. So first off, if you have a categorical raster that has an associated raster attribute table with a classification and you drag it into QGIS, it comes in styled automatically based on the color values that are stored in the table. So here I'm opening up the attribute table for this raster, and there will be this color column that has the colors for each class. And so the data set comes in styled automatically with that without me having to do anything. Similarly, you can change that classification. So if I open up the raster attribute table, I can choose a different attribute column in there and hit the classify button and have QGIS reclassify the layer using the paletted unique values renderer against that to style the data against those categories. Another raster attribute table feature is that you can now use identify features with these raster attribute tables. And now I'm getting, just like I would get with a vector layer, the fields and associated values being pulled from this raster attribute table. And if I open up layer properties for this raster, there's an attribute tables tab. And so I can preview the raster attribute table and I can edit it from here as well. So here I can put it into edit mode and I can change the color for a particular class, for example. Save my edits, and now that has been saved. So you can do more editing of these tables. I can put the table into edit mode and I can add columns or add new entries into new rows. So here I'm going to add a new column and I'll name it yes, no. So I'm basically going to reclassify this raster into cells that may be positive or negative for a habitat type, for example. And so I can see that my new yes, no column has been added to this raster attribute table. Now I've populated that with values, yes and no. And now I could use that to classify this raster. So I could choose this new yes, no column as the classification field, click classify, and now have my raster classified based on that new column. If I add another version of this vegetation raster that doesn't have an associated raster attribute table, I can use the paletted unique values renderer to classify it. And then if I open up layer properties for it, and I go to that same attribute tables tab, I have the option to create a new attribute table from the current symbology. I can choose the sidecar DBF format, click OK, and it puts my classification as an attribute table and will save that for me. So you can, anytime you have a categorical raster, you can use the styling tools to render that and then save a raster attribute table if you don't already have one. So that's a lot of raster features. Switching now to layer legends. So there's now some more intelligent ways to order layers when they first get added to QGIS. So here on the options dialog on the canvas and legend tab, you have an option to basically have QGIS come up with an optical index within the current layer tree group as an option, instead of always putting the layers on top or putting them above the current selected layer. There's a third choice now, optimal index within current layer tree group. And so this has also changed what happens when you drag like a series of shapefiles into QGIS. In 328, it puts them alphabetically in the layers panel. Now in 330, if you do the same thing, it's a little more intelligent. It puts points above lines above polygons in the layers panel. So you can compare new and old here. The old version would just put them alphabetically, and the new version is a little more sophisticated. In print layouts, there's two changes. There's now a shortcut manager. So you can use this shortcut manager within print layouts to create shortcuts for things that you do frequently, like adding a map, adding a legend. And there's also now elevation profile plots available in the print composer. So here I have a print composition open, and if I go to the settings, I can open up keyboard shortcuts now, and I can choose the add map function and hit Control M to add a keyboard shortcut for that. Now, if I hit Control M on my keyboard, I can just automatically drag a box on the map and add my map to it. Here, I'm going to go back in and choose Add Label and enter Control T as my shortcut for that. And I can simply drag a box after hitting Control T on my keyboard and add the title to my map. So that will be nice for people who like keyboard shortcuts. You can set up a custom list of keyboard shortcuts in the print composer to make your work a little easier. One feature that also came out at 328 was the ability to have elevation profiles. And the profiles are now available in the print composer. So there's a new button down here in the print composer for adding an elevation profile plot. And so you can put that where you want to on your print composition, and it will come in styled the same way it did in the main QGIS map canvas. And you have on item properties some controls for adjusting how that elevation profile looks. One area that saw a lot of development was in the field form widgets in QGIS. So it's now possible to have audio visual multimedia attribute attachments. So we've been able to have photographs as attachments, but you can now have videos and audio files as well. So this could be really nice, for example, for use with merge and maps, collecting field data. You can also have there's a data defined variable now for that you can use to control the state of form widgets. So you can set a condition when certain attributes in the form become active based on something that's been entered. And in the text and HTML widgets, you can have dynamic text now. There's a new there's a field called a function called current value, and so that returns the current value that you've entered into a form. And so you can use that with some code to create dynamic text or dynamic HTML in a field form. And then the last thing is that there are now spacer widgets. So you can add spaces between fields in your field form. So here I have a map with some wolf sightings, and I just made this up. And if I go to the attributes form tab, I can see I have a field called area, one called photo, which in the integrated document viewer is set to image. I also have one called audio recording, and now in integrated document viewer, there's an audio setting, and there's also a video setting. So I can record all of that kind of information now. So if I use the identify features, I can click on this point and put the identify features into form view here and see the photo, the audio, listen to the audio and watch the video that are part of this form. So again, I think with field data collection, this could be a really nice enhancement. There's also data-defined editable states for these form widgets now. So here I have a field form, and one of my columns is the column name. And for the other fields, I've set this as a created an expression whereby if name is not null, or basically if there's a value in the name field, then the other fields become active. So all these other fields need to have the user enter something for name now in order for them to become active. So you can use this to control the state of different fields. So here I'm going to add a point, and if I start typing into the name field, these fields down below will become active. I'm starting to just hit a space and they become active, and otherwise they're inactive. Another example is there's spacer widgets. So there's HTML, text, and spacer widgets in here. And this here is a spacer widget. If I double click on it, I can open up the configuration window for that. I didn't give it a name. And then this density is a text widget. And so I've basically put in an expression using the current value function, getting the population divided by the area. So it'll take the current value entered into the form and print that out in this text widget as the density, population divided by area. I'm just adjusting the name here, and then I'll click OK and enter a new point to bring up that field form. So you see I have my name, and for the population, I can enter a value like 10,000, enter an area, and then you see the density get populated with that value. So this wouldn't get recorded in the attribute column, but if there's information like that, you need to be dynamic on the field form, you can now do that with the current value. So moving on to data providers, it's now possible to open up the data source manager and add connection info for an XYZ tile layer without having to create the connection first. You can simply enter the URL and click OK and add it. So this wasn't there before. You had to have connected to an XYZ tile connection first. Now these connection details are just there and available, and you can simply enter the connection details and click add to add that XYZ tile data set to your map. Okay, so that's it. That's a quick summary of what's coming in 3.3.0. So if there's time for questions, I can take some questions.
Thank you, Kurt. There was a question in the beginning. I think it was related to the demonstration with the raster. What was it? The question is, does that require 3-band raster, or does it work with single band as well?
Oh, no, you have to specify the band in the expression. So, yeah, do I have let me see if I have that in the slide. But one thing I had in the expression was the band. Sorry, bring this up. Yes, in the raster map tips, when I here I have the raster band right there. So it's just it's a 1-band raster, and I'm specifying band 1. So you have to specify which band you want. I think you could have a larger map tip that had information from band 1, 2, and 3, for example, if you wanted to. It would just be a matter of writing the HTML for that. And the field form video also with EXIF data. Yeah, I don't know. This is so new. I don't know if in the field widgets, I think this is relating to this question. With audiovisual attachment support, I don't know what formats of video are supported. I used an AVI here. I also tried MP4. And I don't know what the support is like for EXIF data. I do know that, like, for georeferenced photographs in QGIS, you can, there's a processing tool for mapping those points by, it's the geotagged photos algorithm. It extracts that EXIF data from the photographs and creates points for them. And it also will extract azimuth and other characteristics of that EXIF data, but I don't know if that's if there's anything like that for video files.